Kethavar stood in the center of the Galactic Council chambers, his scaled hands clasped behind his back. The massive room stretched out before him, filled with representatives from dozens of different worlds. Each species sat in their own section, designed to accommodate their unique physical needs. The air recyclers worked overtime to maintain atmosphere levels suitable for everyone present. The HFY War correspondent had been called here for a special assignment. He was known throughout the galaxy for his cold analytical reports from battlefields across known space. His people, the HFY, were reptilian beings who prided themselves on emotional detachment. They could observe the most brutal conflicts without feeling anything beyond professional interest. This made them perfect war correspondents. Council leader Zenthai stepped forward. The tall, blue-skinned Alterian gestured toward a holographic display that showed a small, blue-green planet orbiting a yellow star. "This is Earth," Zenthai announced. "Homeworld of the species that calls themselves humans." Kethavar had heard about humans. 3 months ago, they had achieved faster-than-light travel and made contact with galactic civilization. Most species viewed them as another primitive race that had somehow stumbled into space technology. They were mammals, which already made them seem weak to most galactic standards. They were also short-lived, lasting only about 80 to 100 of their planet's rotations around their sun. "The humans have been granted provisional membership in our council," Zenthai continued. "However, we know very little about their military capabilities. This concerns many of our member species." A low murmur ran through the chamber. Several species had expressed worry about letting an unknown military force join the galactic community. Wars had started over less. "That is where you come in, Correspondent Kethavar," Zenthai said, turning to face him directly. "You will travel to their colony world of New Colorado. There you will observe their military exercises and document their warfare tactics. We need to understand how they fight, what weapons they use, and how dangerous they might be to galactic peace." Kethavar nodded once. It seemed like a simple assignment. He had observed dozens of species in combat. Most followed predictable patterns based on their evolutionary background. Predator species fought with aggression and pack tactics. Prey species relied on defensive strategies and superior technology. Hive minds coordinated perfectly, but lacked individual initiative. "What preliminary data do we have about human military capabilities?" Kethavar asked, his voice carrying the flat tone typical of his people. Another council member, a insectoid Clithri, activated a data pad. "Humans appear to be physically weak compared to most galactic species. They have no natural weapons like claws, fangs, or venom. Their technology is approximately 200 years behind galactic standard. Their weapons use primitive chemical propellants instead of energy systems. Their ships are slow and poorly armored," added a third council member. "Their ground vehicles appear to be based on ancient combustion engines. Most concerning, they seem to have no unified planetary government. They fight among themselves constantly." Kethavar processed this information. It painted a picture of a chaotic, weak species that had somehow achieved spaceflight, despite their obvious limitations. Perhaps they had stolen the technology or been given it by another species. It would not be the first time a primitive race had been uplifted beyond their natural development. "I will need 3 standard galactic weeks to complete a thorough assessment," Kethavar stated. "Will the humans cooperate with this observation?" "They have agreed to allow you full access to their military exercises," Zenthai confirmed. "They seem eager to prove themselves worthy of council membership. Admiral Susan Wright will be your primary contact. She commands their colonial defense forces." Kethavar received his travel documents and mission parameters. The assignment seemed straightforward. He would observe human military exercises, document their tactics and capabilities, and file a report that would help the council determine how to classify human military threat levels. As he prepared to leave the chamber, Council Leader Zenthai approached him privately. "Correspondent Kethavar, there is something else you should know. The humans have already been involved in one military action since joining our community." This was new information. Kethavar waited for details. "Pirates attacked a civilian transport carrying Deltan refugees 2 weeks ago. A human patrol ship responded to the distress call. The pirates were defeated, but the human response was unusual." "In what way?" "They took casualties they did not need to take. They rescued the pirates after defeating them instead of leaving them to die in space, and they gave the Deltan refugees passage to safety at their own expense." Zenthai paused. Most species found this behavior confusing. Kethvar considered this. Taking unnecessary casualties was poor military doctrine. Rescuing defeated enemies was wasteful and potentially dangerous. Spending resources on aliens with no expectation of return made no strategic sense. Perhaps they are simply inexperienced in galactic warfare, Kethvar suggested. Perhaps, Zenthai agreed. That is what you will determine. Kethvar traveled to New Colorado aboard a standard diplomatic transport. The journey took 5 days through hyperspace. He used the time to review what little information existed about human military history. Most of it came from their own data transmissions, and seemed to focus on conflicts between different human groups on their homeworld. The records showed thousands of years of almost constant warfare among human factions. They fought over resources, territory, religious beliefs, and political systems. This supported the Council's assessment that humans were chaotic and violent by nature. However, as Kethvar studied the records more carefully, he noticed strange patterns. Human conflicts often included references to protecting civilians. They had elaborate rules about how to treat prisoners. They built medical facilities to care for wounded enemies. These behaviors made no tactical sense. Most puzzling were the numerous references to humans sacrificing themselves for others. Not just for their own species, but for complete strangers. The records contained thousands of examples of individual humans giving their lives to save people they had never met. This was completely alien to most galactic military doctrine. When the transport dropped out of hyperspace near New Colorado, Kethvar got his first look at a human military installation. The colony world orbited a star similar to Earth's sun. The planet itself was mostly covered in grasslands and forests, with several human settlements scattered across 2 continents. The military base was located on the northern continent, built into a natural valley between 2 mountain ranges. From orbit, it looked unremarkable. The buildings were simple rectangular structures with no obvious defensive features. The landing pads were arranged in orderly rows without protective barriers. Not very impressive, commented the transport pilot, a Zentaran trader who had seen military bases across the galaxy. Kethvar had to agree. Compared to the massive fortress cities of the Krillian Empire, or the underground bunker complexes of the Vorthak Defense Force, the human base looked almost primitive. As their shuttle descended toward the landing pad, Kethvar prepared himself for what he expected to be a routine assignment. He would observe some basic military exercises, document human tactical limitations, and file a report recommending that the Council classify humans as a minor military threat. The shuttle touched down on a concrete landing pad marked with simple geometric symbols. A small group of humans waited nearby. They wore matching uniforms in a greenish-brown color that would blend with the local vegetation. Their weapons were clearly visible but not aimed in any threatening direction. Kethvar stepped off the shuttle and walked toward the waiting humans. The group was led by a tall female with short brown hair and bright blue eyes. She wore insignia that identified her as a high-ranking officer. "Correspondent Kethvar," she said, extending her hand in what Kethvar recognized as a human greeting gesture. "I'm Admiral Susan Wright. Welcome to New Colorado." Kethvar briefly touched her hand, noting that humans used physical contact as part of their social interaction. The Admiral's grip was firm but not aggressive. Her expression seemed genuinely welcoming. "Thank you for allowing me to observe your military exercises," Kethvar replied in standard galactic. "I look forward to learning about human warfare tactics." Admiral Wright smiled, showing her teeth. Among most species, this would be considered a threat display. Among humans, Kethvar had learned, it indicated friendliness. "I think you'll find our approach to warfare quite different from what you might expect," Admiral Wright said as she led him toward the base buildings. "We've been looking forward to showing the galactic community what human military doctrine really means." As they walked across the landing pad, Kethvar noticed something that made him pause. Several human soldiers had stopped their activities to watch his arrival, but their expressions were not curious or fearful, as he would expect when meeting an alien war correspondent for the first time. Instead, they looked at him with what could only be described as recognition, as if they already knew exactly what he was capable of seeing, and they were not worried about what he might report. This was not the reaction Kethvar had expected from a primitive, chaotic species meeting their Admiral Wright. Led Kethvar through the main gate of the military base. The facility was larger than it had appeared from orbit, with numerous buildings connected by paved walkways. Human soldiers moved between the structures with purpose, but Kethavar noticed they often stopped to greet each other with casual friendliness. "We've prepared a comprehensive demonstration of our training exercises," Admiral Wright explained as they walked. "General Paul Martinez will be coordinating the ground operations while I handle orbital and aerospace elements." They entered the command center, a low building filled with electronic displays and communication equipment. The technology was indeed primitive compared to galactic standards, but it appeared functional. Human personnel worked at various stations, monitoring communications and tactical displays. General Martinez approached them. He was a stocky man with graying hair and deep lines around his eyes. His uniform carried numerous small decorative items that Kethavar assumed represented military achievements. "Correspondent Kethavar," General Martinez said, extending his hand, "I understand you want to learn about human military doctrine. I have to warn you, our approach might seem unusual compared to other species." "I am here to observe and document without judgment," Kethavar replied. "Please proceed with your normal training activities." Admiral Wright and General Martinez exchanged a look that seemed to carry some unspoken communication. Then Admiral Wright nodded toward the large tactical display at the center of the room. "We'll start with a basic urban warfare scenario," General Martinez announced. "2 companies of infantry, 1 mechanized unit, and air support. The objective is to secure a civilian population center while hostile forces are present." Kethavar settled into an observer's position as the exercise began. The tactical display showed a simulated city with several thousand civilian markers scattered throughout. Enemy forces were positioned in key buildings using the civilian population as cover. This was a common scenario in galactic warfare. Most species would simply bombard the city from orbit, eliminating both hostile forces and civilians. Acceptable casualties usually range from 30 to 60% of the civilian population. But as Kethavar watched the human forces deploy, he realized they were doing something completely different. Instead of taking direct routes to enemy positions, the human units moved in complex patterns designed to avoid civilian areas entirely. "Why are your forces not taking the most efficient approach routes?" Kethavar asked. "Because the most efficient routes go through residential areas," Captain Jake Morrison replied. He was the field commander coordinating the ground units. "We don't move through civilian areas unless we absolutely have to. But this increases your exposure to enemy fire. It makes the mission take longer and puts your soldiers at greater risk." "Yes," Captain Morrison agreed simply, "but it keeps civilians safer." Kethavar watched as the human forces slowly worked their way through the simulated city. When they encountered enemy positions, they used precise targeted attacks instead of area bombardment. When civilians were trapped in combat zones, human soldiers repeatedly exposed themselves to enemy fire to evacuate them to safety. "Your casualty rate is approaching 15%, Kethavar observed as the exercise continued. "You could achieve the same objective with less than 5% casualties using standard galactic tactics." General Martinez nodded. "Standard galactic tactics involve acceptable civilian casualties. We don't consider any civilian casualties acceptable." The exercise continued for 3 hours. By the end, the human forces had achieved their objective of securing the city, but they had taken significantly more casualties than necessary. More puzzling to Kethavar, they had spent enormous time and resources evacuating both civilian populations and captured enemy combatants. "In the next scenario," Admiral Wright announced, "we'll demonstrate battlefield medical procedures." A new simulation began, this time showing a mixed engagement between human and alien forces against a common enemy. Kethavar recognized the alien force markers as representing Deltan military units, the same species whose refugees the humans had rescued from pirates. As the battle progressed, both human and Deltan units took casualties. Kethavar expected each species to focus on caring for their own wounded. Instead, he watched human medical teams rush toward injured Deltan soldiers, often exposing themselves to enemy fire in the process. "Your medics are treating alien casualties before your own wounded," Kethavar pointed out. A young woman approached them. She wore a uniform marked with medical symbols and carried equipment for treating battlefield injuries. "I'm Lisa Chang, combat medic," she introduced herself. "We treat the most severely wounded first, regardless of species. A wounded Deltan soldier needs the same medical care as a wounded human soldier. But this is not your species." You have no biological obligation to preserve their lives. Lisa Chang looked genuinely confused by the question. They're wounded. They need help. Why would their species matter? Kethavar had no answer for this. In his experience, species only cooperated when there was clear mutual benefit. Risking human lives to save alien lives made no strategic sense, unless the humans expected significant future compensation. What do you expect to receive in return for this medical care? He asked. Nothing, Lisa Chang replied. We help because they need help. The medical demonstration continued with increasingly complex scenarios. Human medical teams treated wounded enemies with the same care they gave to their own soldiers. They established field hospitals in dangerous locations rather than evacuate wounded to safety. They used expensive medical supplies on captured enemy combatants. This is extremely inefficient use of medical resources. Kethavar commented to General Martinez. Efficiency isn't our primary concern, the general replied. Preserving life is. After the medical exercises concluded, Admiral Wright led Kethavar to another part of the base. They entered a quiet building that appeared to be some kind of memorial. The walls were covered with names carved into black stone panels. This is our memorial wall, Admiral Wright explained. Every name represents a human soldier who died protecting others. Kethavar examined the wall more closely. There were thousands of names dating back to before humans had achieved spaceflight. But what caught his attention were the small descriptions beneath many of the names. Died protecting Deltan civilians during pirate attack, killed while evacuating, Zentaran refugees from natural disaster, lost while defending Alterian trade convoy from raiders. These soldiers died protecting other species, Kethavar observed, species they had never encountered before. Yes, Admiral Wright confirmed. When we joined the galactic community, we inherited a responsibility to protect all civilized life, not just human life. But humans had no treaties with these species. No formal obligations. Why did your soldiers choose to fight and die for aliens? Admiral Wright was quiet for a moment, studying the memorial wall. Because they needed protection and we were able to provide it. Kethavar found this answer deeply disturbing. It suggested that humans made military decisions based on need rather than strategic advantage. This was completely contrary to accepted military doctrine. That evening, Kethavar was given quarters in the base guest facility. He spent several hours reviewing the day's observations and trying to understand what he had witnessed. Human military behavior consistently defied logical analysis. They took unnecessary casualties to protect civilians. They expended resources on alien casualties with no expectation of return. They had built a memorial to soldiers who died protecting species they barely knew. None of this made tactical sense. Kethavar accessed his communication equipment and sent a preliminary report to the Galactic Council. He described the unusual human military practices but admitted he did not yet understand their underlying strategy. The Council would expect him to identify human weaknesses that could be exploited in case of future conflict. But what if their apparent weaknesses were actually something else entirely? The next morning brought a new type of exercise. General Martinez announced they would observe night patrol operations in hostile territory. The scenario involved a small human unit moving through enemy-controlled terrain to establish reconnaissance positions. As darkness fell, Kethavar accompanied a patrol led by Sergeant Peter Johnson. The human soldiers moved carefully through the forest outside the base, using primitive night vision equipment and simple camouflage. The patrol had been moving for 2 hours when they received a simulated distress call. According to the exercise scenario, a group of civilians was trapped in a building that was about to collapse. The civilians were located deep in enemy territory, far from the patrol's assigned objective. Kethavar expected the patrol to continue with their mission. Deviating to rescue simulated civilians would compromise their primary objective and expose them to unnecessary danger. Instead, Sergeant Johnson immediately ordered his unit to change course toward the distress call. This compromises your mission, Kethavar pointed out. The mission can wait, Sergeant Johnson replied. People need help. The patrol fought their way through simulated enemy positions to reach the trapped civilians. They lost 2 soldiers in the process and failed to. The third day of observations brought Kethavar to the most complex military exercises he had ever witnessed. Admiral Wright had arranged what she called multi-species coalition warfare scenarios. These simulations included not just human forces, but also military units from several allied galactic species. Kethvar found himself in an observation bunker, overlooking a vast training area that stretched for kilometers in every direction. The landscape had been modified to represent different types of terrain: urban areas, forests, mountains, and desert regions. It was an impressive facility that must have cost enormous resources to construct. Today we'll demonstrate how human forces integrate with alien military units, General Martinez explained as they watched various forces deploy across the training ground. This is based on actual coalition operations we've participated in over the past few months. The exercise scenario was complex. A hostile force had invaded a peaceful planet with a mixed population of humans, Deltans, Altarians, and Zentarans. Coalition forces needed to liberate the planet while minimizing casualties. Among both military personnel and civilians, Kethvar observed as human commanders worked alongside alien officers to coordinate their attack. What immediately struck him was how the humans consistently placed themselves in the most dangerous positions. Why are human units always assigned to the high-risk objectives? Kethvar asked Major Alex King, who was coordinating the human ground forces. Because we can take casualties that other species cannot, Major King replied matter-of-factly. Deltans have a much longer lifespan than humans. Losing a Deltan soldier means losing 300 years of experience and knowledge. Losing a human soldier means losing 80 years. The math is simple, but this means humans will always suffer higher casualty rates in coalition operations. Yes, but overall coalition casualties will be lower. That's what matters. Kethvar watched as human units consistently took on the most dangerous assignments. They served as advanced scouts, infiltrating heavily defended positions to gather intelligence for their alien allies. They provided covering fire while other species evacuated wounded. They volunteered for suicide missions to disable enemy defensive systems. In one particularly striking scenario, a mixed human and Zentaran unit was tasked with destroying an enemy command center. The facility was heavily defended and surrounded by minefields. Standard assault tactics would result in approximately 40% casualties among the attacking force. Instead of following standard tactics, the human commander, Lieutenant Carol Davis, proposed an alternative plan. Her unit would create a distraction by assaulting the heavily defended front entrance, while the Zentaran forces infiltrated through a less protected rear access. The humans would face almost certain destruction, but the Zentarans would be able to complete the mission with minimal losses. This plan ensures human casualties while minimizing Zentaran casualties, Kethvar observed. Why would you accept this tactical arrangement? Lieutenant Davis checked her equipment as she prepared for the simulated assault. Because it works. The mission gets completed and more people go home alive. But not your people. Some of my people, she corrected. And all of theirs. That's still a better outcome than everyone taking heavy casualties. The exercise played out exactly as planned. The human unit suffered 70% casualties, creating their distraction. But the Zentaran forces successfully destroyed the command center with only minor losses. From a purely tactical perspective, it was a successful mission. From a human survival perspective, it was devastating. After the exercise concluded, Kethvar spoke with the Zentaran commander, Captain Veltar. The Zentarans were known for their analytical approach to warfare, similar to Kethvar's own people. What is your assessment of human tactical doctrine? Kethvar asked. Captain Veltar considered the question carefully. Initially, we believed humans were simply inexperienced in galactic warfare. Their willingness to take casualties seemed like poor planning. But after working with them in actual combat situations, we have revised our assessment. How so? Human forces achieve objectives that should be impossible. They win battles they should lose. They save lives that should be lost. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves becomes a strategic advantage because it allows for tactical options that other species cannot consider. This was an interesting perspective. Kethvar had been viewing human casualties as a weakness, but Captain Veltar was suggesting they might represent a different kind of strength. The afternoon brought prisoner of war scenarios. Kethvar expected this to be straightforward. Capture enemy combatants, extract information, detain them until the conflict ended. Instead, he observed something that challenged his understanding of how military prisoners should be treated. Human forces captured several simulated enemy soldiers during a mock battle. Instead of immediately interrogating them or placing them in minimal detention facilities, the humans set up what they called a prisoner processing center. Commander Steve Walsh showed Kethavar through the facility. It contained medical stations for treating wounded prisoners, recreational areas, and sleeping quarters that were more comfortable than some military barracks Kethavar had seen. Your prisoner facilities are more elaborate than many species provide for their own soldiers, Kethavar observed. Prisoners are still people, Commander Walsh replied. They deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of what side they were fighting for. But these are enemy combatants. They were trying to kill your soldiers minutes ago. That was when they were fighting. Now they're prisoners. The situation has changed. Kethavar watched as human guards provided medical care to prisoners who had been wounded while fighting against human forces. They offered food and water without being asked. They allowed prisoners to communicate with their families. Most shocking of all, they provided educational materials so prisoners could learn new skills while detained. What do you hope to gain from treating prisoners so well? Kethavar asked. We hope they'll choose not to fight against us again when they're released, Commander Walsh explained. If we treat them badly, they'll have personal reasons to hate us. If we treat them well, they might decide we're not worth hating. This assumes you will release them. Most species execute or permanently detain enemy combatants. Commander Walsh looked genuinely shocked. We don't execute prisoners. When the conflict ends, they go home to their families. Even if they killed human soldiers? Even then, killing people who are no longer fighting serves no tactical purpose. That evening, Kethavar attended what the humans called a memorial service for the soldiers who had been killed during the day's simulated battles. Even though the casualties were not real, the human military held formal ceremonies to honor their simulated dead. The service took place in the base chapel, a simple building with wooden benches and stained glass windows depicting scenes of peace rather than victory. Soldiers from all the day's exercises attended, including the alien coalition partners. Admiral Wright spoke about the human soldiers who had died in the simulations. She mentioned their families, their hopes for the future, and their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others. She also spoke about enemy casualties, acknowledging that even simulated enemies represented real people with their own families and dreams. We honor all who fall in battle, Admiral Wright said, because all life has value, regardless of which side someone fights for. After the service, Kethavar approached Dr. Helen Ross, the base chaplain and military historian. She was an elderly woman with gray hair and kind eyes who had spent decades studying human military traditions. Why do humans hold memorial services for simulated casualties? Kethavar asked. Because the emotions are real even when the deaths are not, Dr. Ross replied. Our soldiers need to understand the weight of their decisions before they face actual combat. Every tactical choice has human consequences, but this could make soldiers hesitant to fight when necessary. It could, but it also makes them fight harder to protect what matters. A soldier who understands the cost of life will work harder to preserve it. Kethavar spent the rest of the evening reviewing his observations. Human military doctrine consistently prioritized preservation of life over tactical efficiency. They took casualties to protect civilians. They risked themselves to save allies. They treated enemies with dignity and respect. According to every military manual in the galaxy, human tactics were deeply flawed. They should lose every conflict they entered. They should be quickly conquered by more efficient military forces. But the evidence suggested something different. In their few months as members of the galactic community, humans had successfully resolved 3 different military conflicts. They had defeated pirates, protected refugee convoys, and helped suppress a rebellion on a mining world. In each case, they had achieved objectives that other species had considered impossible. Kethavar began to suspect that human military weakness might actually be a new form of military strength. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves created tactical opportunities that traditional military thinking could not exploit. As he prepared his daily report for the Galactic Council, Kethavar realized he was struggling to explain what he had observed. Human behavior did not fit into standard military categories. They were not predators seeking conquest or prey species. Defendi Admiral Wright led Kethavar to a building he had not visited before. The human military archives sat at the edge of the base, a low structure built into the hillside. As they approached the entrance, Kethavar noticed the building's walls were lined with what appeared to be memorial plaques. This facility contains the complete military history of humanity, Admiral Wright explained as they passed through security checkpoints. Everything from our earliest recorded conflicts to our recent entry into galactic civilization. Today you'll understand how we became what we are. The interior of the archives was far larger than the external structure suggested. Most of the building extended underground with multiple levels of storage and research facilities. Human archivists worked quietly among countless data storage devices and historical artifacts. Dr. Helen Ross met them at the Central Research Station. She had prepared a comprehensive presentation covering thousands of years of human military history. The main display screen showed a timeline stretching back to humanity's earliest civilizations. "Where would you like to begin?" Dr. Ross asked. "We could start with ancient warfare and work forward, or begin with recent events and trace their historical origins. I want to understand the development of current human military doctrine," Kethavar replied. "How did humans evolve from primitive tribal warfare to your current approach?" Dr. Ross activated the display system. The screen filled with images from early human history. Warriors with simple weapons, armies clashing on open battlefields, sieges of fortified cities. For most of human history, warfare followed patterns similar to other galactic species, Dr. Ross began. Conflicts were about conquest, resources, and survival. The strong dominated the weak. Victory went to whoever could inflict the most damage on their enemies. Kethvar examined the historical records. Early human warfare did indeed resemble standard galactic military doctrine. Armies sought to destroy enemy forces as efficiently as possible. Civilian casualties were considered acceptable. Prisoners were killed or enslaved. But something changed. Dr. Ross continued, advancing the timeline. Gradually, humans began developing different ideas about how warfare should be conducted. The display showed examples of what Dr. Ross called evolving military ethics. Ancient human commanders who spared defeated enemies. Soldiers who risked their lives to protect non-combatants, military leaders who refused orders that would harm innocent people. These examples appear to be isolated incidents, Kethvar observed, individual soldiers acting against standard military doctrine. At first, yes, Dr. Ross agreed. But over time, these individual acts of conscience became accepted military practice. Captain Ben Foster joined them at the research station. He was a young officer who specialized in military history and tactical development. His role was to help modern human forces learn from historical examples. The change accelerated during what we call our world wars, Captain Foster explained, calling up new displays. Massive global conflicts that forced humans to confront the true costs of warfare. Kethvar studied the data from these conflicts. The scale was impressive. Millions of human soldiers involved. Battles spanning entire continents, weapons that could destroy cities. But what caught his attention were the detailed records of individual human behavior during these wars. The archives contained thousands of documented cases of human soldiers choosing moral action over tactical advantage, medics who treated wounded enemies under fire, soldiers who disobeyed orders to protect civilians, commanders who risked their careers to prevent atrocities. These soldiers were punished for their actions? Kethvar asked, assuming that military discipline would require following orders regardless of moral considerations. Some were, Captain Foster admitted. But increasingly they were celebrated. Human society began to honor soldiers who chose conscience over obedience. Dr. Ross brought up specific examples. A human medic who crossed enemy lines to treat wounded soldiers from both sides. A pilot who refused to bomb a civilian target despite direct orders. An infantry commander who surrendered his position rather than use civilians as human shields. Each of these soldiers faced court-martial for disobeying orders, Dr. Ross explained, but public opinion supported their actions. Eventually, military doctrine changed to reflect what human society considered morally acceptable. "This seems inefficient," Kethvar commented. "Military effectiveness requires following orders without question." "That's what we used to believe," Captain Foster replied. "But we discovered something interesting. Units with strong ethical standards actually performed better in combat than units that ignored moral considerations." The displays showed statistical analysis of military unit performance over several centuries. Units that prioritized protecting civilians had lower casualty rates. Armies that treated prisoners well faced fewer desperate last stands from enemy forces. Soldiers who trusted their commander's moral judgment showed higher morale and better tactical performance. Moral behavior became a tactical advantage, Dr. Ross summarized. Soldiers fought harder for commanders they respected. Civilian populations supported armies that protected them. Even enemy forces were more likely to surrender to opponents they trusted to treat them fairly. Admiral Wright activated another section of the display, but the real change came when we encountered our first alien species. The screen showed records from humanity's early space exploration. Their first contact with galactic civilization had occurred only months ago, but humans had been encountering other intelligent species for several years before joining the Galactic Council. We met the Deltan refugees first, Admiral Wright explained. Their ships were damaged and they were stranded in what humans considered our local space. We had a choice: ignore them, enslave them, or help them. Most species would choose based on potential advantage, Kethvar observed. What benefit did humans gain from helping the Deltans? None, Admiral Wright replied simply. At least no immediate benefit. We helped them because they needed help. The archives showed detailed records of the human response to encountering alien refugees. Human ships had diverted from their planned missions to provide assistance. Human colonies had shared resources with alien visitors. Human medical teams had worked to understand alien biology so they could provide proper care. This pattern repeated with every species we encountered, Captain Foster added. Zenteran traders whose ships broke down, Alterian explorers who got lost, Clithri scientists whose research station was damaged by solar flares. In every case, humans provided assistance without expecting anything in return. Kethvar studied the records carefully. Human behavior toward alien species was consistent with their evolved military doctrine. They prioritized preservation of life over strategic advantage. They took risks to help others even when those others were complete strangers. But this approach should make humans vulnerable to exploitation, Kethvar pointed out. Other species could take advantage of human generosity. Some tried, Admiral Wright admitted. Pirates assumed human merchant ships would be easy targets because we don't shoot first. Raiders thought human colonies would be defenseless because we negotiate instead of attacking. Dr. Ross called up combat records from these encounters. They were wrong. The data showed that human forces were extraordinarily effective in defensive combat. When forced to fight, they displayed tactical creativity and determination that surprised their opponents. More importantly, they had developed a reputation throughout known space as protectors of peaceful civilizations. Pirates avoid human patrol routes now, Admiral Wright explained. Not because we have superior weapons, but because attacking human-protected targets brings response from multiple species. We've built a network of allies who support us because we support them. Kethvar realized this represented a completely different approach to galactic politics. Instead of building alliances through mutual defense treaties or trade agreements, humans had created relationships based on moral obligation and shared values. Show me your rules of engagement, Kethvar requested. I want to understand how human military doctrine applies in actual combat. Captain Foster produced a thick manual filled with detailed regulations governing human military behavior. The document was far more complex than standard galactic military codes, with elaborate procedures for protecting civilians, treating prisoners, and minimizing collateral damage. These rules severely limit tactical options, Kethvar observed after reviewing several sections. Human forces cannot use many effective military strategies because of moral restrictions. That's correct, Captain Foster agreed. We accept tactical limitations in order to maintain moral standards. But this should result in military defeats. In theory, yes. In practice, our moral standards become strategic advantages. When civilians trust us to protect them, they provide intelligence about enemy positions. When enemy soldiers know we treat prisoners well, they surrender instead of fighting to the death. When allied species believe in our commitment to protecting them, they fight harder alongside us. Dr. Ross brought up the most recent combat records from human involvement in galactic conflicts over the past few months. In every case, human. Kethvar had spent his final day at the archives preparing his report for the Galactic Council. The document sat open on his personal datapad, filled with observations and analysis that would likely confuse and concern council leadership. He struggled to find words that could adequately explain what he had discovered about human military doctrine. His quarters in the guest facility had become a research center, with displays showing human military history, tactical manuals, and statistical analysis of their recent combat operations. Everything he had learned pointed to the same conclusion. Humans had developed an approach to warfare that defied conventional military wisdom while achieving superior results. A soft chime from his communication system interrupted his work. Admiral Wright's voice came through the speaker. "Correspondent Kethavar, we have a situation developing. Real combat alerts are sounding. If you're interested in observing human forces in actual battle rather than simulation, you should come to the command center immediately." Kethavar quickly secured his research materials and headed for the command center. This was an unexpected opportunity. All of his observations so far had involved training exercises and historical analysis. Seeing humans respond to genuine combat would provide the final piece of evidence he needed for his report. The command center buzzed with controlled activity. Human officers worked at their stations with focused efficiency, while tactical displays showed the developing situation. Admiral Wright stood at the central command station, coordinating with General Martinez and several other senior officers. "What is the nature of this combat situation?" Kethavar asked as he approached the command group. "Pirate attack on a civilian convoy 3 light hours from here," Admiral Wright replied without taking her eyes off the tactical display. "Mixed civilian vessels carrying Deltan refugees, Zentaran traders, and human colonists. The pirates hit them as they were leaving hyperspace near the Kepler Station trading post." Kethavar studied the tactical display. 8 civilian ships were shown under attack by 4 pirate vessels. The pirates had obviously planned their ambush carefully, catching the convoy at its most vulnerable moment during the transition from hyperspace to normal flight. "How many human military vessels are in the area?" Kethavar asked. 2 patrol ships and 1 heavy cruiser," General Martinez replied. "The cruiser is our fastest response unit, but it's still 90 minutes away from the battle zone." "What about other galactic military forces?" Admiral Wright highlighted several positions on the display. "A Krillian battle group is 45 minutes away. An Alterian destroyer squadron is about an hour out. Both have been notified and are responding." Kethavar calculated the tactical situation. The pirates would likely complete their attack and escape long before any military forces could arrive. This was a common problem in galactic space. The vast distances made it difficult to respond quickly to emergency situations. "The civilian convoy is requesting immediate assistance," a communication officer reported. "They have wounded aboard several ships and are taking heavy damage. Order all available units to maximum speed toward the battle zone," Admiral Wright commanded. "What's our estimated arrival time?" 87 minutes for the heavy cruiser Independence, the tactical officer replied. "The patrol ships can reach the area in 73 minutes. Kethavar realized this meant the human forces would arrive at the battle zone before their alien allies. The 2 small patrol ships would face 4 pirate vessels alone until reinforcements arrived. "Your patrol ships are significantly outgunned," Kethavar observed. "Standard tactical doctrine would suggest waiting for the heavier units to arrive." "Standard tactical doctrine doesn't account for civilian casualties accumulating while we wait," Admiral Wright replied. She activated the communication system. "Captain Nancy Green, this is Admiral Wright. You are authorized to engage the pirate forces immediately upon arrival. Priority is civilian evacuation and medical assistance." Captain Green's voice crackled through the speakers from the patrol ship Defender. "Understood, Admiral. We'll do everything we can to protect those civilians." Admiral Wright turned to face Kethavar directly. "You wanted to observe human military doctrine in action. You're about to see what it really means." Over the next hour, Kethavar watched the human response unfold on the tactical displays. The 2 patrol ships pushed their engines beyond safe limits to reach the battle zone as quickly as possible. Medical teams prepared for mass casualty situations. Engineering crews worked to modify cargo ships for emergency refugee transport. "Why are you risking your patrol ships?" Kethavar asked. "They cannot defeat 4 pirate vessels in direct combat." "They don't need to defeat the pirates," General Martinez explained. "They need to protect the civilians until heavier units arrive. But this will likely result in the loss of both patrol ships and their crews." "Maybe. But it will definitely save civilian lives." When the patrol ships arrived at the battle zone, Kethavar watched a display of tactical creativity that impressed him despite his analytical detachment. Instead of engaging the pirates directly, the human ships positioned themselves between the pirates and the damaged civilian vessels. Captain Green's voice filled the command center as she reported the situation. "We have visual on the convoy. 3 civilian ships are severely damaged and venting atmosphere. We're counting approximately 200 casualties across all vessels. Proceed with evacuation protocol," Admiral Wright ordered. What followed challenged everything Kethavar thought he knew about military priorities. The human patrol ships used themselves as shields, absorbing pirate fire while their shuttles evacuated wounded civilians from the damaged convoy ships. When pirate vessels tried to maneuver around the patrol ships to continue their attack, the human ships moved to block them, regardless of the damage they took in the process. "Your ships are taking heavy casualties," Kethavar observed as the tactical display showed increasing damage to both human vessels. "The Defender has lost main weapons and is operating on backup power," the tactical officer reported. "The Guardian reports hull breaches on 3 decks but is still operational." "Captain Green, status report on civilian evacuation," Admiral Wright requested. "We've evacuated all critically wounded civilians from the damaged ships, still working on the walking wounded and non-injured passengers. We need another 20 minutes to complete full evacuation. The pirates are regrouping for another attack run," the tactical officer warned. "Both patrol ships are too damaged to withstand another assault." Kethavar expected Admiral Wright to order the patrol ships to withdraw. They had done what they could, and preserving military assets was important for future operations. Instead, she activated the communication system again. "Captain Green, you are authorized to use any necessary tactics to protect those civilians. The heavy cruiser will arrive in 15 minutes. "Understood, Admiral. We'll hold position." What happened next would stay with Kethavar for the rest of his life. The 2 damaged human patrol ships positioned themselves directly between the pirates and the civilian convoy. When the pirates attacked, the human ships absorbed the full force of the assault, using their own hulls as armor to protect the defenseless civilian vessels behind them. The Defender was destroyed in the attack, all hands lost. The Guardian survived but was left barely functional, drifting dead in space with most of its crew wounded or killed. But the civilian ships remained protected. Their evacuation completed just as the heavy cruiser Independence arrived to drive off the remaining pirates. Final casualty report. Admiral Wright requested after the battle concluded. 37 human military personnel killed, 52 wounded, the tactical officer reported. Civilian casualties, 12 dead, 43 wounded. All civilian ships and personnel successfully evacuated. Kethavar stared at the tactical display showing the wreckage of the Defender and the crippled Guardian. 37 human soldiers had died to save 12 civilians. From any rational military perspective, this was an unacceptable exchange ratio. But as he watched the rescue operations unfold, with human medical teams treating wounded aliens alongside wounded humans, with human engineers working to repair damaged alien ships, with human cargo vessels transporting rescued civilians to safety, Kethavar began to understand something profound. Those civilians included people from 4 different species, Admiral Wright said quietly, standing beside him as they watched the rescue operations. "Deltans, Zentarans, Alterians, and humans. Our people died protecting them all equally. Your casualties were disproportionate to the civilians saved," Kethavar observed. "Numbers don't tell the whole story," Admiral Wright replied. "Each of those rescued civilians will go home to their families. They'll tell their children about what happened here. Some of them will choose careers in medicine or engineering or diplomacy because they want to help others the way they were helped today. And your soldiers who died? They made a choice to protect civilized life. They knew the risks and chose to take them anyway. That choice means something to every species in that convoy, and to their families, and to their homeworlds." As the immediate crisis ended, Kethavar found himself in a conversation with Captain Nancy Green, who had been rescued from the wreckage of the Guardian. She was injured but insisted on participating in the post-battle debriefing. "Why did you?" Kethavar stood once again in the Galactic Council chambers, but everything felt different now. The same representatives sat in their designated sections, the same air recyclers hummed quietly in the background, and the same massive displays showed star charts and galactic territorial boundaries. But Kethavar himself had changed in ways he was still trying to understand. 3 weeks had passed since he returned from New Colorado. 3 weeks of reviewing his notes, analyzing his recordings and struggling to write a report that would adequately convey what he had witnessed. The document in his hands represented the most challenging assignment of his career. Council leader Zenthai activated the central display system. Correspondent Kethvar, please present your findings on human military capabilities and doctrine. Kethvar approached the central podium, acutely aware that every species in the chamber was watching him. They expected a straightforward tactical analysis that would classify humans as either a minor threat or a potential problem. What they were about to receive would challenge their fundamental assumptions about warfare itself. Honored council members, Kethvar began, his voice carrying its characteristic analytical tone. I have completed my assessment of human military forces. However, I must warn you that my findings do not conform to standard military classification systems. A murmur ran through the chamber. Several species representatives exchanged concerned glances. The Krillian military observer leaned forward with obvious interest. Please proceed with your analysis, Zenthai instructed. Kethvar activated his presentation displays. The screen showed tactical data from the human exercises he had observed, but also included historical analysis and comparative studies with other galactic military forces. From a purely technological perspective, human military equipment is indeed primitive by galactic standards, Kethvar reported. Their weapons use chemical propulsion rather than energy systems. Their ships are slower and less armored than comparable vessels from most Council species. Their communication systems rely on outdated electromagnetic transmission methods. This was what the Council expected to hear. Nods of satisfaction appeared among several species representatives. The preliminary assessment suggested humans posed no significant military threat. However, Kethvar continued, technological capability does not accurately predict military effectiveness in the case of human forces. The displays changed to show statistical analysis of recent human military operations. Despite their technological disadvantages, human forces had achieved remarkable success rates in every conflict they had entered since joining galactic civilization. In the past 6 months, human military units have participated in 12 separate combat operations alongside Council forces, Kethvar explained. In 11 of these operations, the presence of human units improved overall mission success rates while reducing total casualty figures among allied forces. General Tharkvon of the Krillian Empire stood up. Correspondent Kethvar, are you suggesting that primitive human forces somehow improve the performance of superior galactic military units? That is exactly what I'm suggesting, Kethvar replied. And the mechanism behind this improvement challenges everything we think we know about military doctrine. Kethvar activated a new set of displays showing detailed analysis of human tactical decision-making. The data revealed patterns that would seem irrational to any conventional military commander. Human forces consistently choose tactical options that appear to be disadvantageous, Kethvar explained. They accept higher casualty rates to protect civilians. They expend resources on enemy wounded. They risk mission failure to evacuate non-combatants. By every standard metric of military efficiency, human doctrine is deeply flawed. Then why are you wasting our time with this presentation? Demanded Representative Velcri of the Alterian Fleet Command. If humans are militarily incompetent, they pose no threat to galactic security. Because their apparent incompetence produces superior military results, Kethvar stated flatly. The chamber fell silent. This was not what anyone had expected to hear. Kethvar continued his presentation, showing detailed combat analysis from the pirate engagement he had witnessed. The data showed how human tactical choices, while seemingly irrational, had achieved objectives that conventional military doctrine could not accomplish. The human patrol ships that engaged the pirates were outgunned 4-1, Kethvar explained. Conventional tactics would have required waiting for reinforcements, resulting in complete destruction of the civilian convoy. Instead, human forces chose to sacrifice themselves to protect non-combatants, resulting in unnecessary military casualties, General Tharkvon observed. This confirms that human doctrine is inefficient. The immediate result was 37 human military deaths, Kethvar agreed. However, the long-term strategic consequences were far more complex. The displays showed follow-up analysis of the battle's aftermath. The civilian convoy had contained representatives from multiple species. including some that had previously been neutral or hostile toward the Galactic Council. The human sacrifice had profound political ramifications throughout known space. The Deltan Confederacy has committed 2 battle fleets to joint operations with human forces, Kethvar reported. The Zentaran Trade Alliance has provided advanced defensive technology to human colonies. 3 previously neutral systems have requested Council membership specifically to gain access to human military protection. You're suggesting that human military sacrifices create political advantages? Council leader Zenthai asked. I'm suggesting that human military doctrine operates on principles that extend beyond immediate tactical considerations, Kethvar replied. They fight not just to win individual battles, but to create conditions that make future battles unnecessary. Admiral Sektar of the Vorthak Defense Force activated her communication panel. Correspondent Kethvar, you are Vorthak. Our people are trained to analyze military situations without emotional bias. Are you certain your assessment has not been compromised by extended exposure to human emotional manipulation techniques? Kethvar had expected this question. His own people would naturally suspect that human empathy had somehow corrupted his analytical abilities, but he had prepared for this challenge. I have considered that possibility extensively, Kethvar replied. However, my conclusions are based on statistical analysis rather than emotional response. Human military doctrine produces measurable strategic advantages that cannot be explained by conventional military theory. He activated a new display showing comparative analysis of military alliances throughout galactic history. The data revealed that alliances based on mutual defense treaties typically lasted an average of 47 standard years before dissolving due to conflicting interests. Human alliances, by contrast, appear to be growing stronger over time, Kethvar explained. Species that have been protected by human forces develop what can only be described as loyalty that transcends normal diplomatic relationships. Loyalty is not a military asset, General Tharkvon stated, isn't it? Kethvar challenged. When the pirate attack occurred, Deltan and Zentaran civilian vessels immediately moved to support human rescue operations, despite having no formal obligation to do so. Alterian traders in the area diverted their ships to assist with medical evacuations. Former enemies voluntarily risked themselves to help human forces. The chamber grew quiet as representatives considered the implications. Military alliances built on mutual obligation were common throughout the galaxy. Alliances built on genuine cooperation were extremely rare. What you're describing sounds like emotional manipulation on a galactic scale, Representative Velcree suggested. Humans create artificial emotional bonds to control other species' military responses. That was my initial hypothesis, Kethvar admitted. However, extensive observation revealed that human emotional responses are genuine rather than calculated. They appear to genuinely care about the welfare of other species, even at significant cost to themselves. Dr. Zenthkai, the Council's chief military analyst, stood to address the chamber. Even if we accept that human emotional responses are genuine, this does not explain their apparent military effectiveness. Caring about others is not a tactical advantage. Kethvar had saved his most significant finding for this moment. He activated displays showing detailed analysis of human unit performance under various conditions. Human military units demonstrate performance, characteristics that correlate directly with their moral certainty, Kethvar explained. When human soldiers believe they are protecting innocent life, their combat effectiveness increases by an average of 34%. When they believe their cause is morally justified, their willingness to take risks increases dramatically. This suggests that human military effectiveness is based on psychological factors rather than tactical training, Dr. Zenthkai observed. Correct. But the psychological factors produce real tactical advantages. Human units fight harder, longer, and more creatively when they believe they are protecting something valuable. They take risks that other species would consider suicidal. But those risks often succeed because human soldiers are willing to sacrifice everything. The Galactic Council chamber had never seen debate like this. Representatives from dozens of species argued loudly in their sections, while translators worked frantically to keep up with the multiple conversations happening simultaneously. Council leader Zenthai repeatedly called for order, but the implications of Kethvar's report had shattered the usual diplomatic calm. General Tharkfon of the Krillian Empire was the first to formally respond. He stood at his species-designated speaking position, his massive frame imposing even among the diverse assembly of galactic representatives. Council Leader, this report contains dangerous misinterpretations of military effectiveness, General Tharkfon declared. Correspondent Kethvar has been clearly influenced by human emotional manipulation. No military force can achieve superior results by accepting unnecessary casualties and wasting resources on enemies, Admiral. Sektor of the Vorthak, Defense Force rose to support her fellow military commander. I agree with General Tharkfon. As a member of Correspondent Kethvar's own species, I must express concern that prolonged exposure to human emotional tactics has compromised his analytical objectivity. Kethvar remained standing at the central podium, waiting for permission to respond. He had expected resistance to his findings, but the intensity of the reaction suggested his report had struck deeper than he anticipated. Correspondent Kethvar will have opportunity to address these concerns, Council Leader Zenthai announced. But first, let us hear other perspectives on this matter. Representative Veltar of the Zentaran Trade Alliance activated his communication system. I must disagree with the military representatives. My people have direct experience with human protective forces. 3 months ago, human patrol ships rescued a Zentaran merchant convoy from pirate attack. They took significant casualties protecting our vessels and asked for nothing in return. This supports Correspondent Kethvar's analysis. Veltar continued. Human military behavior is indeed unusual, but it produces real benefits for other species. The Zentaran Trade Alliance has seen measurable improvements in shipping security since establishing cooperative agreements with human forces. Dr. Yenthri of the Deltan Medical Council stood to speak. The Deltan Confederacy has similar experiences. Human medical teams have provided assistance during 3 separate natural disasters on Deltan worlds. They risked their own lives to save Deltan civilians with no expectation of compensation. This is precisely the problem, General Tharkfon interrupted. Human behavior appears generous, but it creates dependency relationships that could be exploited for political control. Or, Dr. Yenthri replied sharply, it creates genuine cooperation based on mutual respect and shared values. The Deltan Confederacy has committed military resources to joint operations with humans, not because we owe them, but because we trust them. Representative Klithka of the Insectoid Collective buzzed their translator to address the chamber. The collective has analyzed human military doctrine from a hive mind perspective. Their individual soldiers demonstrate coordination and self-sacrifice typically seen only in genetically programmed social insects. This suggests evolved behavioral adaptations rather than emotional manipulation. Council Leader Zenthai gestured for quiet as the debate threatened to become chaotic again. These perspectives are valuable, but we need systematic analysis rather than anecdotal evidence. Correspondent Kethvar, please address the concerns about your objectivity. Kethvar stepped forward, his scaled hands clasped behind his back in the traditional Vorthak posture of formal address. Admiral Sektar raises a legitimate concern about analytical objectivity. I have therefore prepared additional evidence that does not rely on my personal observations. The chamber displays activated to show new data compilations. Statistical analyses filled the screens, showing military engagement outcomes across dozens of different conflict scenarios. I have analyzed every military engagement involving human forces since their admission to the Council, Kethvar announced. The data includes operations where humans fought alongside Krillian forces, Altarian fleets, Vorthak units, and independent mercenary groups. The statistics were striking. In every case where human forces participated in military operations, overall casualty rates decreased while mission success rates increased. The effect was measurable and consistent across different types of conflicts and different alien allies. Furthermore, Kethvar continued, I have compared human military performance with historical data from other species during their first years of galactic military service. Humans demonstrate effectiveness levels that typically require decades of experience to achieve. General Tharkfon studied the data displays with obvious skepticism. Statistics can be manipulated to support any conclusion. What evidence do you have that human military doctrine is actually superior, rather than simply unusual? Kethvar had prepared for this challenge. I propose a practical test. The Council is currently facing a military situation that conventional, Forces have been unable to resolve. He activated a new display showing the Outer Rim, territories where pirate activity had increased dramatically over the past year. Multiple Council fleets had attempted to suppress the pirates, but the raiders simply moved to new locations after each engagement. The Outer Rim piracy crisis has resisted solution for 18 months, Kethvar explained. 7 different Council military operations have failed to achieve lasting results. I suggest deploying human forces to this region under Council observation. You want to test untested human military doctrine against a problem that has defeated experienced galactic forces? Admiral Sektar asked incredulously. I want to demonstrate that human military doctrine offers solutions that conventional approaches cannot achieve, Kethvar replied. Council leader Zenthai considered the proposal. The Outer Rim situation had indeed become embarrassing for the Council. Pirates were disrupting trade throughout the region despite repeated military interventions. What makes you believe human forces would succeed where Council fleets have failed? Zenthai asked. Because human forces would not attempt to defeat the pirates through superior firepower, Kethvar explained. They would attempt to eliminate the conditions that create piracy in the first place. This statement caused another eruption of debate. Military representatives argued that eliminating crime required eliminating criminals. Diplomatic representatives pointed out that addressing root causes of piracy was a political, rather than military solution. You're suggesting that humans would approach the piracy crisis as a social problem rather than a military problem? Dr. Zenthakai asked. I'm suggesting that humans do not recognize a distinction between military and social problems, Kethvar replied. They view military force as one tool among many for protecting civilized life. Representative Veltar activated his communication system again. The Zentaran Trade Alliance would support such an experiment. Our merchant convoys are suffering significant losses in the Outer Rim. If human methods could resolve the situation, we would benefit regardless of the theoretical implications. The Deltan Confederacy would also support this test, Dr. Yen3 added. Our refugee transport ships have been attacked repeatedly in that region. General Tharkvan stood again, his expression showing deep concern. This proposal could set dangerous precedents. If we allow untested alien military doctrine to operate in Council territory, what message does this send about our own military capabilities? It sends the message that we are willing to learn from successful innovations. Representative Klithka buzzed through their translator. The collective values effectiveness over tradition. Admiral Sektar looked directly at Kethvar. If human forces fail in this test, will you acknowledge that your analysis was incorrect? If human forces fail using their own doctrine, I will acknowledge that my analysis requires revision, Kethvar agreed. But the test must allow humans to operate according to their own principles rather than conventional Council military procedures. What specific authority would human forces require? Council leader Zenthai asked. Kethvar activated displays showing the proposed operational parameters. Human forces would need authority to negotiate directly with pirate groups, to establish civilian protection programs, to coordinate with local governments, and to use non-lethal resolution methods as primary tactics. You want to give humans authority to negotiate with criminals? General Tharkvan demanded. I want to give humans authority to try methods that conventional military forces cannot or will not attempt, Kethvar replied. The debate continued for several hours as representatives considered the implications of the proposal. Military commanders worried about setting precedents that could undermine traditional command structures. Diplomatic representatives saw potential advantages in alternative approaches to persistent problems. Trade and civilian representatives focused on practical results rather than theoretical concerns. Finally, Council leader Zenthai called for a formal vote. All representatives in favor of authorizing experimental human military operations in the Outer Rim territories. The vote was closer than Kethvar had expected. Military representatives mostly opposed the proposal, while civilian and trade representatives largely supported it. The deciding factor came from species that had direct experience with human military assistance. The Motion Pa, the human fleet assembled at New Colorado, was unlike anything Kethvar had seen in his years covering galactic military operations. Instead of pure warships, the task force included medical vessels, engineering ships, cargo transports filled with construction equipment, and even what appeared to be mobile educational facilities. Admiral Wright stood with him on the observation deck of the command ship as the fleet prepared to depart for the Outer Rim territories. 37 vessels in total, but only 12 were dedicated combat ships. The rest were support vessels designed for humanitarian operations. Most galactic fleets would deploy twice as many warships for an operation of this scope, Kethvar observed. Most galactic fleets would be planning to fight their way through the Outer Rim, Admiral Wright replied. We're planning to solve the problems that created the piracy crisis in the first place. General Martinez joined them as the fleet entered hyperspace. The journey to the Outer Rim would take 4 days, giving them time to review the operational plan in detail. Our intelligence analysis identified 3 primary factors driving piracy in the region, General Martinez explained as they settled into the briefing room. Failed colonial settlements, disrupted trade routes, and displaced refugee populations. The tactical display showed a complex web of interconnected problems spanning dozens of star systems. Traditional military operations had focused on hunting down pirate fleets, but new pirates always emerged to replace those that were eliminated. The Colony Relief Program addresses failed settlements. Admiral Wright continued the briefing. We'll provide engineering support to repair infrastructure, medical assistance for health crises, and educational resources to help colonists develop sustainable economies. The Trade Route Security Initiative will establish permanent patrol stations with mixed human and alien crews, General Martinez added. But instead of just hunting pirates, these stations will offer services to legitimate traders and assistance to ships in distress. And the Refugee Integration Project will work with existing pirate groups to provide alternatives to raiding, Admiral Wright concluded. Many of these people turned to piracy because they had no other options for survival. Kethvar studied the operational plans with growing amazement. The humans were not just planning to suppress piracy, they were planning to eliminate the conditions that created pirates. This approach will require enormous resources with no guarantee of success, he pointed out. Traditional military operations are more cost-effective. Traditional military operations in this region have failed repeatedly for 18 months, Admiral Wright replied. Cost-effectiveness must be measured by long-term results, not immediate expenses. And if your approach fails, if offering assistance to pirates simply encourages more piracy, General Martinez looked at him seriously. Then we'll learn from our mistakes and try something else. But we won't abandon people who need help just because helping them involves risk. When the fleet arrived in the Outer Rim, Kethvar got his first close look at the devastation that had created the piracy crisis. Failed colonies drifted in space, their life support systems failing and their populations desperate. Refugee ships wandered between systems, unwelcome in established territories and unable to return to their destroyed homeworlds. The first test of human doctrine came within hours of their arrival. A distress call from a civilian transport reported that they were under attack by raiders in the Kepler sector. Traditional response would involve dispatching warships to engage the pirates and rescue the civilian vessel. Instead, Admiral Wright ordered a mixed response team that included combat ships, medical vessels, and what she called negotiation specialists. You're sending diplomats to a pirate attack? Kethvar asked. We're sending people who understand that pirates are still people, Admiral Wright replied. The response fleet arrived at the attack site to find a typical piracy scenario. 3 raider ships had disabled a civilian transport and were in the process of transferring cargo to their own vessels. The civilian crew was being held hostage while the raiders stripped everything of value from the ship. But instead of immediately attacking the pirate vessels, the human commander, Captain Ben Foster, opened communication channels with the raiders. Attention raider vessels. This is Captain Foster of the human patrol ship Defender. We are here to offer assistance to all ships in this area. The pirate response was predictably hostile. Human ship. Withdraw immediately or we will destroy the civilian transport and all hostages. We understand you have resource needs that have driven you to raiding, Captain Foster continued calmly. We're prepared to discuss alternatives that might meet those needs without requiring you to attack innocent people. Kethvar watched this exchange with fascination and concern. In his experience, pirates responded only to superior force. Attempting to negotiate with them during an active attack seemed likely to result in increased civilian casualties. But something unexpected happened. The pirate commander, clearly confused by the human response, agreed to a brief communication exchange. "What kind of alternatives?" the pirate leader asked. "Medical assistance for your ships, technical support for equipment repairs, and information about legitimate employment opportunities in nearby systems," Captain Foster replied. "Plus safe passage to any destination you choose if you release the hostages unharmed." The negotiation continued for 20 minutes while human medical ships quietly moved into position around the civilian transport. Kethavar realized that the humans were not just offering assistance, they were demonstrating their ability to provide it immediately. "How do we know you won't attack us once we release the hostages?" the pirate commander asked. "Because we give you our word," Captain Foster replied simply. "And because attacking you would make it harder to help the next group of people who find themselves in your situation." The pirates released their hostages. Over the following days, Kethavar observed as human teams worked with the former pirates to address their underlying problems. Medical teams treated crew members who had been injured in previous raids. Engineering teams helped repair damaged ships. Most importantly, diplomatic teams worked to find legitimate employment for people who had turned to piracy out of desperation. 3 of the pirate ships have accepted transport contracts with Zentaran trading companies. Admiral Wright reported a week into the operation. 2 others are working with Delton mining operations. The remaining group has requested passage to the frontier territories where new colonies are being established. "You converted pirates into legitimate workers?" Kethavar asked. "We provided alternatives to piracy. They chose to take advantage of those alternatives." The pattern repeated throughout the Outer Rim as human forces encountered other pirate groups. Some chose to fight rather than negotiate, and human forces defended themselves effectively. But most were willing to consider alternatives when those alternatives were genuine and immediately available. More importantly, the human approach addressed the root causes of piracy. Failed colonies received engineering assistance that restored their infrastructure. Refugee populations found new homes or received help establishing sustainable settlements. Trade routes became safer not just because of increased patrols, but because fewer people were driven to piracy by desperation. Pirate activity in the region has decreased by 67%, General Martinez reported after 6 weeks of operations. More significantly, refugee ship attacks have dropped by 91%, and failed colony raids have been eliminated entirely. Kethavar compiled his observations into daily reports for the Galactic Council. The statistical results spoke for themselves. Human methods were achieving success where traditional military operations had failed, but the implications went far beyond the Outer Rim crisis. Human forces had demonstrated that military strength could be used to address social problems, rather than simply suppress symptoms. They had shown that former enemies could become allies when offered genuine alternatives to conflict. The most significant discovery, Kethavar wrote in his final report, is that human military doctrine scales effectively from individual combat situations to complex regional crises. Their willingness to address underlying causes rather than just immediate symptoms produces lasting solutions rather than temporary victories. As the Outer Rim operation concluded, Kethavar realized that his original assignment had evolved into something much larger. He had been sent to assess human military capabilities, but he had ended up documenting the emergence of an entirely new approach to galactic security. Admiral Wright found him in his quarters as he prepared his final reports for transmission to the Council. "So, Correspondent Kethavar, what will you tell the galaxy about human warfare?" Kethavar looked at the data displays showing the transformed Outer Rim territories. Former pirate bases had become trade stations. Refugee camps had evolved into thriving settlements. Failed colonies were rebuilding with sustainable economies. "I will tell them that I was sent to report on human warfare. But I discovered that humans have evolved beyond warfare into something that might be called aggressive peacemaking." Kethavar replied, "And what do you think the Council will do with that information?" Kethavar considered the Quesi.